A very good afternoon, parents, as well as our colleagues from all the preschools. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, this late afternoon on Friday. We'll begin in about 1-2 minutes time. Thank you for being so punctual. I believe that there are other parents who will also be joining us, so do give them a couple more minutes and we'll start soon. Thank you. Okay, a very good afternoon, everyone. I'm the principal of Admiralty Primary School. I shall begin, but because we are also waiting for some more parents to be joining us as well as members of the public who are interested in hearing a little bit more about this parents engagement session, how to choose a primary school. So I'll start off with a few administrative announcements first while we wait for the others to join us. Okay, the first thing is just to take note that we will be recording this session so that we can also put it up at the end of the day. We can, for those who are unable to join us for today, they can actually access the recordings. But thank you so much for joining us today, and I hope that you all will find this session useful. Feel free to also make use of the Q&A chat to also put down some of the questions that you may have, and we'll try and get back to you with regard to these questions, right? So like what I mentioned just now, the session will be recorded. We will also be putting the PowerPoint slides and the recording onto our school website. Do type in your questions along the way. Some of the questions that will be addressed in this session itself, I think the very first one is about why choosing the primary school and the right one actually matters to you and to your child. What are some of these factors to consider when you're choosing a school for your child? And thirdly, what are the phases of primary school registration? You will be aware that I think in a couple of years ago, there have been some changes to our primary one school registration phases. And this will definitely impact you in terms of your child who will be entering primary school in the years to come. So we will give you some information about that as well. How do you help your child to transit from preschool to primary school? The setting of preschool versus primary school is indeed very different. So what you can do as a parent at home, some of the things that you can probably help your children at home. And also the advice to preschools as well. What are certain things that you may want to know that's happening in a primary school so that in your conversations with your children, you can also help the children too. Just to be very clear, this is not about why you should be choosing Admiralty Primary School. Okay, it's not a session to promote my school. In fact, there are other sessions that are coming up that if you are interested in Admiralty Primary School itself, 31st of March, that is next Friday, 3 to 5 o'clock, we will be having such a session, and I'll be explaining a little bit more about the different programs that we have at Admiralty Primary School. And if you do feel that the school has got the kind of programs that matches what you have in mind for your child, this is a platform for you to also find out a bit more. And on the 14th of April, we have a session. If you are a parent volunteer with us, I think this will be a session that will benefit you. So for those who are on the parent volunteer scheme, from 4 to 5 o'clock on the 14th of April. Okay, these sessions are all on Friday. So the first thing about why choosing the right primary school really matters, I think this first point, I just wanted to really reiterate very, very strongly. You would have seen a lot of newspaper articles about this, but my encouragement to all parents out there is when we choose a school, a primary school, do not choose merely because of the brand name, the popularity of the school, or from past results of the school on PSLE, that because of the name that you've heard in the past and make those decisions solely on that. I think there's a lot more things to actually consider. Some of the factors that I mentioned here. Distance from home is something that I think matters greatly. So sometimes if you do feel that your child is independent enough at a certain age to make his way or her way back home, then distance really matters, because when the school is near to home, you expect that the child will be able to go home rather quickly and to be able to get to the work that needs to be done for the day. The time that is actually saved from traveling will be beneficial to the child. Other things like availability of the student care center. And our schools all do have a school-based student care center. Parents who prefer to actually register your child for student care centers that are not within the primary school, then you will also want to see whether the external SCC is near to the primary school that you are interested in. Things like school culture, family values, the child's interests. All the primary schools in Singapore do have certain niche programs as well as cultures that may differ from school to school. So it will definitely be useful for you to go to the different school websites. If you have other considerations, like for example, distance from home, you can narrow down, take a look at the different schools that are within your vicinity, which cultures actually speaks to your child, right? Other things like quality of teaching and learning of the school, as well as co-ed versus non-co-ed. Some things for you to consider. So distance from home, I won't go through all the points in great detail, but do take note that most primary schools do start at 7:30 in the morning. That is the earliest time that primary schools will start. Okay, but we do normally encourage children to do come in before then so that they can settle in nicely. But anything that starts is actually the start time stipulated at 7:30 onwards. Right? Ending time might differ for schools. So just as an example, if I use for Admiralty Primary School, we do end at 2:10 on our Tuesdays to Fridays. Our Mondays, we end at 2:40. Because on Mondays, we do have CCAs for our P3 to 6s in the mornings. So that's why we end slightly later on a Monday afternoon. And then on the other days, because every day we do factor in a time slot for lunch for our children as well. So by the time we end, you may make a comparison between the different schools. The ending timing might be different as well. So extended travel time, something I mentioned, I don't think that we will want the child to be overly affected in terms of the rest time if too much time is taken up just for traveling. Okay, so school bus, something to take note of in terms of timing to pick up the child, drop off in school, and then followed by the return route when going back home. When your child goes into primary 3 to primary 6, that is when you need to factor in for longer school days, longer school hours, because of CCAs, extra classes in the afternoons. Sometimes, if let's say your child requires some remediation, especially in upper primary, in the primary 6 year, when the child is going to take PSL in the year, naturally, if the child requires a bit more remediation when it comes to certain subjects, so do expect that the child may have a longer day. And also take note, because of the vicinity where you stay, sometimes the heavy traffic situation is something that you may wish to also monitor. At certain timings, because our schools are very much located within the neighborhood, so certain roads may be taken up by heavy traffic when it comes to certain dismissal timings. This last point about distance from home is a value that we always iterate and reiterate with our children. There's the idea about reporting punctually to school. It is a very, very important value for them to get when they are young. Right. Then the next thing I mentioned about in terms of student care on site as well as near to school. Some things for all parents, do take note about this. Do figure out what would be your childcare arrangement after school for your child. Okay, the next slide about understanding the school culture. So some things to also take note. Again, different schools have got very different unique school programs. Take a look at the school websites. Find out a little bit more what is it about these schools that make them unique for themselves. Some of the schools do really focus, generally all schools are very big into student-centric, values-driven education. The values bit is very important for all of our Singapore schools. But different schools will approach it slightly differently as well. And if let's say there are certain schools that have a clan and religious connection to it, so there are multiple examples in this case, right? For example, when we talk about Tao Nan, talk about St. Hilda's Primary, these are schools with either a clan association or if not, a church association, so a religious association. Okay, special assistance plan schools, so schools in Singapore that actually has got extra rigor when it comes to the teaching and learning of the Chinese language. So their students actually take higher Chinese language, and as well as the school's approach towards discipline. Many, many different factors for our parents to also consider. Okay, whether the school provides opportunities for the children to learn beyond just the classroom. And I think I will really very much safely say for all the primary schools in Singapore, on behalf of all my counterparts in the other primary schools as well, I think this is something which all of us do believe very, very strongly. The teaching and learning mustn't be just confined to the classroom. All the primary schools in Singapore really do offer opportunities for your children to learn beyond the classroom, because that is where teaching and learning comes alive. They can look at the application of it. And when you see them bringing their learning back into the classroom and talk about it with a lot of joy, you know that the children are really extending their learning and applying their learning. Some of these schools will have CCAs that you may also want to project a bit further and think about it. So if let's say you do know that the different schools, some schools have got CCAs that are very unique to these schools, is that something that you may be very interested in? But then again, do be mindful that even if you are very interested in a particular CCA for a child, usually the primary school may reserve the right to say, by the time it comes to primary 3, how do they select, how do they allocate CCAs to the children, especially if it is a CCA that's very popular amongst all the children and parents. CCAs are very, very big in primary school, and a lot of primary schools do make it somewhat compulsory in that sense as a school policy, because they want all the children to acquire new skills. It is a platform for character building. And if you were to ask any of the primary school children who are going through CCAs right now, they would safely say to you that it is a very, very big part of the education in primary school, something that they will not give up for. Okay, so quality teaching and learning in school, I think in comparison to at the preschool stage, you realize that teaching and learning take on a very different stance on its own as well, when we talk about primary school curriculum and beyond. Right, so that is when the children will also be exposed to many other things. For example, things like our applied learning programs, learning for life programs. These two programs called ALP and LP is something that all primary schools as well as secondary schools are required to offer. They are like our niche programs. So if you look at, for example, Admiralty Primary School, you look at our website, you will see what our ALP and LP are. It will be different from what other schools have to offer. And ICT enabled emphasis as well. I think ICT is something that is becoming very big. We know that moving ahead, there is no way that we can continue with teaching and learning without imbuing in our children ICT skills. So this is something which all the primary schools are also starting to develop in our children ICT skills so that they are able to do it in a very responsible way. Something about co-ed versus non-co-ed for all parents to also consider. Being in the co-ed school has definitely got its advantages as well, right? The idea that we are preparing our children for the real world. Children from both gender will have to mingle, they have to interact. And if that's the case, choosing a primary co-ed school for you, especially if you have children of different genders, is something that you may want to consider. If you do choose a non-co-ed school for your child, but if let's say it's an all-girls school, later on, when it comes to the younger one who is a boy, you may have to go through the entire P1 registration phases again. Because for siblings who are studying in the same school, they will actually go through the priority phase, which is phase 1. So something for all parents to consider, especially if you have children of different genders. Okay, some information regarding P1 registration. I alluded to that just now. Phase 1 is the phase where a child who has a sibling studying in a primary school, that is the first phase that will kickstart the entire primary 1 registration. Phase 2A, in the past, if you remember, there was a phase 2A bracket 1, phase 2A bracket 2. Now it has already been merged. It's just one phase, phase 2A, is for children whose parents or siblings are former students of the primary school, okay, including those who have joined the alumni association. So in the past, you remember, if you join the alumni association, that will be part of 2A1, but now it's no longer the case, right? 2A1, 2A2 is the same. Also, the second bullet point, whose parent is a member of the school advisory or management committee, parents who are staff members of the primary school, as well as if the primary school has a MOE kindergarten, right? And then it's under the purview and located within that primary school itself, then the child will qualify for phase 2A. Phase 2B are for children whose parent has joined the school as a parent. Are you all able to hear me at this point in time? Okay, so sorry about that technical difficulty. Okay, so let me repeat that. So for phase 2B, for parents who have joined the primary school as a parent volunteer, whose parent testing. Sorry if you all are hearing this. We have some technical difficulty. As a result, we got kicked out of the Zoom session just now. Just give us 1 minute while we try and resolve this, all right? Apologies for that. Okay, sorry about that. Let me just share my screen again. Okay, yeah, let me just repeat what I mentioned just now about phase 2B. Right, I stopped at the part whereby if let's say the primary school is a government aided school, meaning that it has an association with a clan or a church, for example, then parents who are members of that church or clan, they will be phase 2B, okay, or for parents who are active community leaders. Phase 2C is for a child who is not yet registered in a primary school, and in this case, I'm talking about our Singapore citizens, okay. There's 2C supplementary. It's for children who are not yet registered in a primary school after phase 2C. And then lastly will be phase 3, which is for international students. So if for our Singapore citizens and our PRs, it will be all the way until phase 2C or phase 2C supplementary. Phase 3 will be for international students. This is just a hypothetical example about our P1 intake and how it will look like. So for example, if I have a total of 210 places that are given to a particular primary school at a P1 2022 intake, all right? What happens is that if we have 112 places already taken up at phase 1, meaning that we have got 112 students who have got children who have got siblings that are already in the school, then we have 98 places that are remaining. There are compulsory places that are being set aside for phase 2B as well as 2C. And you can see here in the next row, there is 20 places are set aside for phase 2B and 40 places, the compulsory places set aside for phase 2C. Compulsory, those are places mandated by the Ministry of Education for all primary schools to set aside, right? Is to actually allow for a certain diversity in terms of the profile of the students and where they come from. And hence, the number of places that are remaining are what has been indicated at the side there. Now, the number of places taken at phase 2A would then be, let's say it's 5 places that are taken up. And what we have at the end of the day is that we have 33 places remaining after phase 2A. With these 33 places, if you recall earlier, I mentioned that 20 set aside for phase 2B, 40 set aside for phase 2C, then there needs to be a 1:2 ratio. A 1:2 ratio in terms of the split in the number of places that's remaining, with the ratio of 1 unit given to phase 2B, 2 units given for phase 2C. That's why you see 11 to 22. 11 plus 22 will give you 33. And hence, you will see that at phase 2B, that is the total number of places that will be remaining for phase 2B, and total number of places for phase 2C will be 62 places. Okay, so that bullet point that is mentioned down there is about places allocated at phase 2C is double that given to phase 2B. And these are all stipulated by the Ministry of Education. Okay, and this is in addition to the reserved places that we mentioned just now. So 1/3 of places, vacancies at the end of a phase 2A would then be allocated to phase 2B, 2/3 to phase 2C. That's how it is our ratio of 1:2. All right, I'll just pause here for a minute before I move on to the next slide. All right. Okay, so then there will be the question of when balloting comes in. This happens when the number of applicants exceeds the number of available places. So just now when you saw the number of places remaining at each of these phases, especially when it comes to phase 2B, when it comes to phase 2C, just now earlier, if I were to go back to the previous slide, phase 2B shows that you have 31 places remaining. If let's say we have got many people who qualify for phase 2B beyond this 31, as well as at phase 2C beyond this 62, that is when balloting will take place. Singapore citizens will have priority over SPRs. Okay, and then the second thing is that balloting will be done in consideration of distance. That's why just now I also mentioned and highlighted the idea about distance. This should be one of the big factors when you are considering about your primary school. So within 1 km, between 1 to 2, and then outside of 2. So in that particular order, when we talk about balloting being done. Okay. These are some tentative dates for you to think about, because the last when I checked the MOE website as well, I don't think that the actual dates are out yet. But if we look at past few years, the trend, the tentative dates are around there. So for phase 1, we are expecting it could be around the dates of about 4th to 5th of July. Phase 2A, it will be the middle of July. So early July followed by middle July, towards the end of July, and then early August. All right, and then mid-August. For the last phase, that is for our international students, there will be an online indication of interest for those who are non-Singapore citizens, non-PRs. All right. Okay, phase 2B, just wanted to mention a little bit more about this phase. I mentioned just now, for parents who join the school as a parent volunteer, Do take note that there is the requirement that for the upcoming registration, you must have registered no later than 1st of July 2022. Okay, as stipulated by MOE's website. But also, you will have to take note that this is also dependent on different schools, because different schools may have a certain cut-off date of their own. But it's because it's already in the past. But one of the guidelines is also that for parent volunteers to have contributed at least 40 hours of voluntary service to the school by 30th June this year. Okay, and then some of the others, like for example, association endorsed member of association's church, the clan that's connected to the school, active community leader. The last bullet point there, please do take note, and I hope this is something which all school leaders would like to see parents understanding, and on behalf of all the primary schools as well, that the completion of 40 hours of voluntary service really does not guarantee a place in the school for your child. Also, reason being, it depends on the number of parent volunteers that have signed up, that have been registered with each of the primary schools. Right. So again, if let's say because of the needs of the school, there are more parent volunteers than the places, we hope to seek your understanding that balloting will need to kick in if let's say more than 20 of the places that were set aside for parent volunteers, the parents all do sign up for the school at phase 2B. So some considerations, just to reiterate some points that were mentioned just now. I think when registering for P1, do some initial research, right? Find out a little bit which are the schools, especially those which are in the vicinity, are schools that you are really very interested in. It speaks to you, it speaks to your child. Make a short list of these schools so that you're very clear about what are the choices, and then you have a particular rank order for them. You may wish to attend as many of your schools open houses as possible, right? Because I think different schools will be briefing the parents about what are the programs that we have. So for example, for Admiralty Primary, if you're interested in the school, next week we are having our e-open house. Find out more from friends, from neighbors, people who may be able to give you an indication about the kind of education that you expect your child to be able to receive in the school. And may I just mention again, don't go for just the results as well as the academic part that you always hear. I think there's a lot more to primary education than just the academics only. All right. Once you finalize your shortlisting, that's when the registration will come in once the windows open. You may wish to then monitor some of the status of your balloting, evaluate your chances before you move on to the next phase. I think in recent years, actually, some of the phases, they are being reported on the news, but you can get the balloting details on the MOE's websites as well. Okay, this is about transition from preschool to primary school. Something that is very important for you to take note of. I think the most important thing is, first and foremost, you need to understand what is the new environment in the primary school all about. All the primary schools usually will have some kind of orientation. It's either an e-orientation, or now because of the reopening, we may go back to physical orientation depending on the school. Take a look at the school website together with your child. Get your child interested and excited about the school himself or herself as well. Because at the end of the day, this is a school that your child is going to, not you. So do sit down with your child to think about it, to talk about it, look at the pictures, look at the website together. So allow your child to also share a little bit, right, about what he or she is actually receiving in information back at preschool, because they may hear about certain things, they may wish to talk about it. And I think these are things that is always useful dinner table kind of topics. Understand the new rules that are happening at the primary school. Primary schools are a lot bigger than the preschools in terms of the numbers. So just to share, for example, in Admiralty Primary, I have a total of 1,250 students because that spans across from primary 1 to primary 6. The needs of all my children are very different. And in order for such a school to be able to function properly, effectively, and look after the well-being of every child, we need a very effective set of rules in the school. And usually you'll be able to find these things either on the school website, or if not, in student handbooks. They will always be in all the student handbooks that the students of the school will have. Okay, and most importantly, something that always emphasized to my teachers as well as my parents in the school right now is there will be occasions when there will be there could be unhappiness that pops up, right? But the question is, when these things do happen, the first thing that we always ought to do is the connection between the form teachers and the parents, so that we find out what exactly is happening, how come there were certain squabbles that happened between the students, so that we can resolve it, and the parents as well as the form teachers can come into the picture to try and help the children to resolve it between themselves. That's the first rule that we always have, to get the children to resolve things amicably between them. Is, I think, that very first step towards independence as a child in primary school. Building new relationships, I just talked about that, right? Making new friends, interacting with them. When we make new friends, it also comes with the possibility that we may actually squabble with our friends. There may be disagreements. How do we help our children appreciate diversity, accept differences as well as disagreements? This is really very, very important, right? So we can see that children who are able to regulate their emotions with the help of teachers, after some time, they go towards self-regulation. And then that goes towards negotiation between friends to be able to talk things through with their friends. The next thing is about new routines as well as timetable. When your child enters primary school or before it enters the primary school, usually you have an idea about the timetable, how the hours will look like. It's something to actually have the conversation with your child, prepare your child for what the longer school day could look like. Because some of our children, when they are in preschool, they may be doing it as a half day rather than a full day. But especially when the children go to P3 and above, that's when CCAs come in, after school activities do come in as well. And then even if at P1 and P2, we do give our children homework, there is that routine that we want to set up with them. When they go back home, to complete their homework, to be checking their work. So that is the excellence that we wish to actually build in each and every one of them, that discipline, right? Things like also packing their school bag. We will want to encourage all parents, work with our child to teach them how to pack their school bag independently. So that when they go to school, when they forget things, they ought to understand that there are consequences for forgetting things as well. So don't be too quick to want to save them when they actually forget things, but they have to learn from the fact that, okay, ultimately it's up to me to be independent to pack my school bag. I've forgotten something, I have to live with that. So when I go back home, I need to know that I need to pack that. Bear with me, I just have a few more slides here, but I wanted to zoom out a little bit to speak to all parents about our mindsets about education. You could have seen this article in the Straits Times. Minister for Education, Mr. Chan Chun Sing, mentioned at the start of the year about 5 key areas that we need to do in education to make ourselves very relevant as Singapore, to keep our children relevant as well. The first thing is about customizing learning and then helping to close our learning gaps early in life, which also means that the customization, the learner centricity has to come in very early in our education system. And primary 1 is definitely one of those early stages that we wish for this to take place. We are also moving beyond this whole idea that education is just the first 15 years. It's a lifelong learning. What that means for us is also in school, we are also moving away from the idea that we just pursue the degrees, pursue the academics in the classroom, but is what are the skills that our children need to acquire, this lifelong learning kind of mindset. I think some of these things in our conversations with our children, when we are mindful about the language we use, actually it builds in them that kind of mindset and mentality also. The third thing is, while he mentioned about stronger academia and industry linkages, seems to be quite far-fetched for us at a primary school level. But what we are talking about in the classroom and the conversations I'm having with my teachers is this. When we do teaching and learning in the classroom, it needs to be very relevant. Our children need to see why is it that mathematics, for example, is useful for them. Because then if they can see real-world applications, they will be very enthused by the subject. They will go in with a different mindset. The fourth point is about involving the whole of society. And that's where I think parents, you play a very big role in this as well. We need to continually broaden our definition of success. right? When we involve all our stakeholders in our children's education, the language that we use with our children, do we give them a growth mindset to keep thinking about what does success mean, right? To keep shifting them away by thinking, by the end of the day, it's just about PSLE scores, it's about getting into this secondary school, that primary school, but really it's about the mindset that they're going to develop. So, okay, I'm going into this primary school already, but it's how I make the best of it. Or when I go into secondary school, because of the PSLE score that I have, how am I going to continue to acquire new skills? I think that's the kind of mindset we need to grow in every single one of our children. And the last bit is, I think, this investment in the education teaching fraternity. Just want to also assure you on behalf of all the schools, the ministry as well. I think a lot of resources are being pumped in to make sure that our teachers are top notch. And it is a journey. We are continuously getting our upgrading, not just the teachers, school leaders as well, so that we become experts when it comes to facilitating teaching and learning in the classroom. While we may not always be the experts in the content knowledge, but I think how we facilitate our children's growth and the learning in the classroom is very important. All right. So that's all I have for the slides. Just wanted to check if there are any questions from parents that you may wish to pose to us. You would see also in the chat that earlier Mr. Humry had also put in, I think, the school finder. The school finder is actually really very useful for you if you were to click on that link to find out a little bit more about the different schools in your vicinity, as well as what are the CCAs, the subjects, the programs that they have. Do take a look at that. Are there other questions? Okay. If there are no other questions, then I think I will call this webinar to a close. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope it has been useful for you. Feel free to also just browse the different school websites again to find out more information. And like I mentioned, we will put this video clip up on our school website if you need to review some of the information. All right. Thank you so much. Have a great evening as well as a weekend. Thank you.